this webinar. And this is the third in a series of webinars. I think we've got about 22 for the rest of this academic year that cover a range of themes and topics that are interesting to people who are in educational establishments. It's my honor to introduce Melissa Smith today. You may have read her blurb, which is saying that she's in most important schools, international schools in Thailand. We can't expect our English teachers will cover all of the language and grammar our students need to be successful in our country's classes. And this webinar today is going to be targeted at Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 teachers who need to make their own content accessible to EAL learners. And you'll be discussing specific strategies such as vocabulary development and scaffolding tools that you can use immediately in your classes. And that to me is one of the key successes to the webinars, is things that us teachers can pick up and have an immediate impact and a positive impact on our students. Melissa is currently teaching as the head of English of EAL at Brighton College, and she has a huge amount of experience as a head teacher with 20 years experience in teaching English, ranging from beginning English to college level writing. She's enthusiastic about new challenges and developing teachers and having students and schools reach their full potential. And Melissa is very passionate about what she's doing, and I'm sure all of you are looking forward to the sorts of words of wisdom that Melissa will be sharing with us. So Melissa, I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. First of all, you may notice my accent is a little different from everyone else's, and that's because I'm an American working at a British school, but I can take it. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Let me share my screen with you guys. Okay, so, you know, this is really a huge field. I mean, people get their PhDs in how to meet the needs of English language learners. And so I'm going to take 45 minutes and just really kind of hit the high points for you guys. So the first thing that I want to talk about is, Duncan already introduced me, so there's that. So the three things I want to focus on today are giving context to what your pupils are learning and building background knowledge. Then we're going to talk about thoughtful vocabulary instruction. And then the last thing we'll discuss is considering the language outcomes, what we want our pupils to do with the things that they're learning in our class. And I'm sorry if it sounds old-fashioned, but in my school, we refer to our students as pupils. So you may hear me calling them pupils. So, okay. The first thing that we need to do is really activate the pupils' prior knowledge. They may already have some of this knowledge in their native language, or they may have some connections to the topic that we're about to discuss. And one way, there are several ways to do that. And I've just pulled together some examples of some really good graphic organizers that you might use. This first one is an anticipation guide from the novel Holes. So you might have some general statements that apply to life in general and ask the pupils whether they agree or disagree, and maybe give some comment and explanation. And it just gets them thinking about the themes that the book will discuss. Then when they've finished reading certain points, they can come back and revisit these questions and decide if they've changed their mind or how reading the text has influenced their decision. The next one is just a concept map, a very simple one where you have the main idea and then it maps out into subtopics. There's several things you can do with this kind of concept map. You can give the pupils a blank map and have them fill in what they know. For the lower level pupils, you can give them what goes in the bubbles and have them place them. Another thing you can do is give some blank spaces where they have to fill in the remaining information. Another thing I like to do is give them the facts and have them come up with a subtopic, because our students have a struggle generalizing ideas and organizing information. So there's lots of things you can do with concept maps. For the more advanced pupils, you might throw in some non-examples that they might have to sort through and say, this doesn't fit with any of our facts, and it needs to be put to the side. The last one is a KWL chart. What do I know about this topic? What do I want to know? And then later on, they'll come back and fill in what have I learned. This is just really good to keep them revisiting what they already knew. And then as they learn new things, they can go deeper and deeper into their KWL. And when you include the what do I want to know, it gives them ownership over the lesson, and they're going to buy in. They're going to have buy-in. They're going to be more willing to participate. Okay. These are some more ways to connect to their background knowledge and to build context. This thieves over here is just a little acronym that someone uses for previewing a text, where you look at the title, the headings, the introduction, and then I really like this. Look at the first sentence in each section. Look for the visuals and the vocabulary. Again, that's where the pupils might already have the concept in their native language. Now you just need to tie the English word to the concept, okay? So maybe in year 6, a pupil has already studied the life cycle of a butterfly, and they may know what metamorphosis is in their native language, but now they've come to you and you've got to teach them what it is in English. So if they're looking at those visuals and they're looking at that vocabulary, they might already know the concept. So that's a good way to connect to their background. Then look at the end of the article or the end of chapter questions, because that really tells them what are the key things you need to focus on. Now, obviously, this is kind of an American acronym, since we use textbooks far more often than international schools do, but still, it's especially on the GCSE level, when they have their questions at the back, they can look and see what are the really key things. That way they know as they're reading what they need to focus on. Okay. Now, I really like this second idea of connecting to a pupil's background. Use a text or bring in something from their culture, from their perspective. The example I've used here is to talk about World War II from the perspective of a Japanese American who was in an internment camp. That might just be an interesting, novel way to connect to the culture. One of the things that I do in my class is we talk about idioms, and a lot of idioms across the world have similar meanings, but the idioms are different. And so I love to have my pupils talk to me about Thai idioms, and I talk to them about American idioms. And my favorite one, this Thai idiom, is you think you are a frog with a coconut shell. And I just think that's great. If any of my Thai speakers know what I'm saying, I hope I'm not butchering it. But it's basically, you're a frog with a coconut shell on your back, so you think you're a turtle, so you think you're better than you are. So I just love that. So anytime I'm talking about idioms or phrases, I always try to bring it back to the Thai culture and the Thai language. When we did Romeo and Juliet and we were studying vocabulary built around death and funerals and things like this, I had my pupils teach me about Buddhist burial rituals and all of these things. And so it just gives them a reason to connect to whatever it is you're teaching. Okay. Now, one of my biggest things that I really focus on is planning vocabulary instruction. And there are several key things that we need to think about when we're planning our vocabulary instruction. The first thing that we have to do is we have to consider the range of vocabulary that we have to teach. We can't just think, okay, I'm a history teacher and we're studying the bubonic plague, and I have to teach them bubonic, and I have to teach them plague and boobles and all of these things. Yeah, that's the content vocabulary. But you have to look at the text that you're using and making sure that that functional vocabulary, that academic vocabulary that your pupils may be missing. You have to also consider, how are you going to teach that? Let me give you an example. Last week, one of my pupils brought in his chemistry exam, and I was looking through it, and there were words like decrease, increase, evaporate, evaporation. What were some? They were just like these function words, that these academic vocabulary words that he didn't have. And so his teacher needed to plan for that, or help me plan for that when I'm working with the EAL pupils. So you not only have to look at your content vocabulary, but what academic vocabulary are they going to need to understand your content? Phrasal verbs is a big one. A jump up, jump over, jump in, jump from, jump toward. There are phrasal verbs in different content areas that we really need to think about. What phrasal verbs can I teach my pupils to help them understand this content? Okay. Now, so this is just an example of my vocabulary planner for the Romeo and Juliet unit that I did last year. So you'll see that I have my literacy focus. So that would be kind of the content vocabulary that I would have to teach them. Those are the things that we're learning about in English, okay? But then I realized that we had these symbols and these allusions that these pupils needed to understand to be able to access Shakespeare at a deeper level. These pupils aren't Western raised children, so they may not know who Cupid is, or who Echo is, or what the moon represents in Western culture. So I had to do a whole couple of lessons on allusions and on Greek mythology for them to understand these. Then you'll see I have the vocabulary from the different acts. This is kind of what I was meaning to, it was explaining, this is not content vocabulary. This would be academic vocabulary that the students need to understand the text. Now, this is not every vocabulary word that I don't think that they understand. There's no way that we can teach every single word that they need to know. The text wouldn't make sense. So what I did was I looked at the list of words that I thought they needed, and I looked for patterns. How can I teach these words in a group so that they would understand and retain this vocabulary? Because I would rather that they retain 10 vocabulary words over the course of a month than I try to teach them 40 vocabulary words and they only retain like 2. So you can kind of see like vocabulary act 4 and 5, there's a lot of, like I said, death and funeral. And then in acts 2 and 3, it's very much about revenge and the feuds between the families. And then act 1, it's about relationships and honor and kind of setting the scene for how they're supposed to act. Then you can see that I have a grammar focus for my unit. And then this took a whole term. Now, English teachers are going to do things like this, but I really think that content teachers need to consider this as well. For example, passive voice is something that's very difficult for our pupils. They're just not exposed to it. And in English, we might not want our pupils to write in passive voice. However, in science, we write reports in passive voice. It was found that evidenced by, so we would use passive voice. So I would encourage you content teachers to look at texts from your field and look at what style of writing, what grammar, what usage do you need? Are you supposed to use adverbs of uncertainty? Are you supposed to use words like possibly, maybe, slightly, or are you supposed to be, sure and firm in the convictions of your findings? So think about those things when you're thinking about what you need to teach, okay? Now, how should we teach the words? Some words you might not even explicitly teach. You might be reading it and you might go, oh, that word means this, because they may never see that word again. Let me think of an example. If you're reading a text about a doctor and they say he took the Hippocratic Oath, it's not time for us to take a 6th grade pupil and give him an explicit lesson on Hippocratic oath. You just might say, oh, that's the oath that doctors take. Okay. Now, if you're in a psychology course and you're talking about science experiments that are designed and you're talking about these people who break the Hippocratic oath, well, then yes, you're going to want to do some more time with it. But you have to think about how deeply do the pupils need to know this word. Okay. So you may just go over the text. They may be able to tell the meaning of the word from the context. And so that's a skill that we have to build as well. Teaching our pupils what signal words help us understand definitions. Then there is, the final one is the explicit teaching of vocabulary instruction. And I think that that's the part that we're all lacking, that I don't think that we're doing well enough for our pupils. Okay, and so I'm going to show you some things that I think you can do to get better at that. So one of the things that is really important to an English language learner is that they learn what the puzzle of English is. Because once they learn how these pieces fit together, then they can start to use the words as their own. And so I spend a lot of time on word analysis. And I teach them that prefixes change the meaning of a word. So illegal, immoral, disadvantage. And then this is where I spend a lot of my time. We work on suffixes because suffixes change the part of speech of a word. And I can show you my word wall quickly. And I'm constantly telling my pupils to look up here and figure out how to change a word from a noun to an adjective to a verb. And then I'll even tell them that ship, a noun that ends in ship is usually an abstract noun. A noun that ends in ent, A-N-T, is usually a person. So we spend a lot of time working through our prefixes and our suffixes because our students find that very difficult when they're writing to take a word and go from noun to verb and adjective. And then finally, the root words are so important to study, especially science-related root words, because once these pupils unlock these root words, then they will find so much more vocabulary at their hand. And so our school is putting together a working wall of root words, and I can send you guys an example of it, but teaching them that photo means light and graph means right. So every time they see photo, photosynthesis, photograph, photo, I don't know, but with graph, cartography, geography, all of these things. So if you teach these pupils these root words, then their vocabulary will just expand immensely. Okay. So this would be like at the end of a unit of vocabulary, I would give them a chart similar to this. And the first activity would be, how many can you do without the dictionary? And so they would fill it in as many as they can. How many of these can you do without any help? So then they do it with what they can. Then the next step is I give them the words that you just saw. I give them, they have their yellow book. Let me show you that, sorry.
High level. I can't even hear it from this.
Can we have questions at the end? Okay, this is a good one. So my students have this EAL Bible, and in it are the things that we're studying, and they have all of the suffixes. So the second step I would give them is try it with the suffixes. And then if they couldn't figure them out, then they could use the dictionary. And then it's really fun for them to come back with different forms of the word, and they'll say, oh, but Mrs. Smith, it's oppositional or opposite, and then we can discuss about connotation and denotation of the words. So we do this all the time. Another example of explicit vocabulary instruction is the Freyer model. This is, let me let her in. This is, you can find blank ones online, but a Freyer model is when you really need a deep understanding of the term that you're trying to teach. So it's not going to be a word like annoy. You're not going to use a Freyer model for that. Maybe the overarching ideas that you're working on, you would really want to do a Freyer model. So in a Freyer model, what you do is in the center, you put the term that you're discussing, and then you have a definition. Now, I'm going to ruffle some feathers, okay? I believe you should give the definition that you want your students or your pupils to have. I don't believe in sending pupils out to look up definitions in dictionary. Most English teachers go, but they need to learn how to use the dictionary. Yes, that's true. But once they show me they know how to use the dictionary, I no longer want them going out willy-nilly and finding a definition that may or may not fit with what I'm trying to teach them. So for example, if my word is colonial, and they go and they look up colonial in the dictionary, and they come back and they say, have or related to the colonial period, that doesn't tell them anything what that word means. So I would tell them, perhaps colonial, maybe we're studying architecture, and I want them to understand what colonial architecture is. I would say it's related to the colonial period of the United States, which is, and I would give the years. So I believe in giving the pupils the definition that you want to give them. And like I said, I'm ruffling some feathers. I know that, but I would rather them spend time working with the words than hunting for definitions, okay? The next part of the Freyer model is facts or properties. So this is where you would say, you know, for my colonial example, you would talk about the columns and the bricks and, you know, the style of the veranda or the balcony. So that's where you would put some interesting facts. Then at the bottom, you're going to give some examples and some non-examples. And this is where some people would write a sentence. If it's a vocabulary word, you might write a sentence. Non-examples is usually the hardest thing for the students to come up with, but it's a really good thought process to get them thinking. Okay. This to me is a really good activity to do as a review and to have the pupils do them in groups and then present to the other pupils. It's a good activity. Now, this is an activity called Vocabogram, and it's a pre-reading activity. And you would give the students, the pupils, a list of vocabulary. This is kind of hard to read, I'm sorry, like peer, masterpiece, exaggerated. And you would spend just a few seconds explaining what the word means to the students. Then they would decide which box should I put that word in. So you might say decayed. Oh, decayed is like when something is broken down and it's dying and the you know, the outside has done damage to it. Where do you think we might put that? And then they would tell you. What that does is that gets them thinking about what that word means. Then when they're reading the text, when they come to that word decayed, they're going to go, oh, Ms. Smith, it's decayed. And you can say, where did you put it? Oh, I put it in the setting. And then you would say, is it describing the setting? Yeah, it is. So it's just a really good way to get them thinking about what they're going to read and learning new vocabulary, but it's not so formal and it doesn't take so much time. And then you give them a few words that don't fit anywhere. And you may even give them some words that don't show up in the story at all. So there's lots of things that you can do with this one. So I am a very, 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 very big believer in not having matching quizzes when you're testing vocabulary. I believe that a vocabulary quiz should be just another opportunity for the pupils to interact with the vocabulary that you have taught them. So instead of a matching quiz, I'm going to ask very personal questions that will help me understand, help me see that they understand the vocabulary. So for example, if the word is pessimist and optimist, I will ask my pupils, do you consider yourself a pessimist or an optimist? Why or why not? Or why, how do you know? Then they have to recreate, their answer has to start with the sentence restated. I consider myself a pessimist because. And their answer has to show me that they understand what pessimist means. Now, this is another ruffle the feathers. I let them use the definitions or the vocabulary cards that we've done in class, because again, it's just one more way for them to interact with that vocabulary, okay? Now, I'm not a fan of making them write down the definition either. However, in some Key Stage 3 exams, they do have to write down the definitions. And if that's the case, then obviously don't change how you're testing your pupils. But if the assessments that you're giving your pupils in the end never ask them to write down a definition of a word, then there's really no sense in us asking them to write down the definitions in daily practice, okay? So off my soapbox, and I hope no one's angry with me. Teaching English as a foreign language kind of has some political implications, especially in the United States, and some people feel one way and some people feel another. So if anything I'm telling you goes against everything you've ever taught and it's frustrating you, send me a message and let's talk about it, okay? And now the third thing I'd like for you to consider is, how are the pupils going to use this language in your class? If the word is precipitation, are they going to have to be able to use precipitation in a sentence? Are they going to have to provide examples of precipitation? So if they're going to have to say, Thailand only has a few forms of precipitation, then you need to make sure that you've structured your instruction to provide time for them to use the language in the way that you're going to need it. Okay, so they might have to change the word forms. They might have to provide examples and non-examples. And you need to plan for activities for them to talk through these things. I've included on the resources a link to a website called Kagan Online. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Kagan strategies, but it's just probably 100 to 200 ways to structure your classroom, or to structure a discussion, or to structure a group project, so that every pupil must speak and every pupil has an opportunity to speak. So it's just an amazing, amazing set of structures and strategies that work for oracy that I would recommend that you check out. One is, so for example, the pupils form 2 lines and one has to talk to, so this one asks the question and this one has to answer the question, and then they move. And so the pupils have to talk to different people, but then they also, now they have to switch roles. And so there's just things like that that Kagan teaches you how to do that I just think are just really important for our EAL pupils. And I'm sorry I didn't say this in the beginning, but EAL instruction is just really good instruction for all of our pupils, in my opinion. Okay. Now, some of the ways to scaffold this learning is to allow your EAL learners a chance to preview the text before you give it to them. So we have we use Google Classroom. So I might send a text home, obviously not a text that we're gonna test on, but maybe a text that we're gonna read. I might send it home and let my students look at it beforehand so that they can answer any questions they have, look over it. The next thing you can do is plan for the questions that you're going to ask your EAL learners to be at their level. So for instance, if you have a beginning pupil in your class, you might plan to ask that pupil a yes/no question. If you have an intermediate learner, you might give them multiple choice. But if you have an advanced learner, you might ask them to answer the question that requires some thinking and some higher level of Maslow's hierarchy of, sorry, my daughter just walked in and she's distracting me, of Bloom's taxonomy. That's what I was thinking of. The other thing is give the pupils sentence stems. I think this is correct because, or a similarity I found is. So give those pupils sentence stems. And give them in this little yellow book, or just give them to them on the day that they come in. A lot of people keep like a key ring with cards with sentence stems, and you can just flip through them. That's a really good use of your teaching assistant, is to have them put together those sentence stems and show the pupils, this is the kind of sentence stem you need to use here. Our school has recently started the reading caterpillars. I think it's I'm not sure what scheme it is, but all the teachers will be asking similar questions. So when we're asking about inferencing, we're all wording it the same way, and we're teaching the pupils how to structure their answers in a similar way so that they build on that. And then it's just, the language is already there. Then they just have to plug the new content into it. And then, like I said, consider the Kagan structures and strategies. When and how to correct errors. We cannot correct every error every time. We wouldn't want to, first of all, because that would bring the students down. That would raise an affective filter, which means they're no longer comfortable learning with you because all you've done is point out the errors, okay? But we do have to correct their errors some of the time. But don't call it out directly. Don't go, boy runs, not boys run. So what you have to do is repeat the phrase, repeat it with the correction. Oh, do you mean the boys run? Yes, Miss Smith, the boys run. Okay, okay. And I call out subject-verb agreement all the time because even the ones who know it make that mistake. And I've told them, you will not leave my EAL class until your subject-verb agreement is perfect. So that's one I call out a lot. But you definitely, and I would encourage you to call out the errors of whatever it is you're working on in class. If you're working on irregular past participles, then I would definitely call those errors out when you see them, and definitely in their writing. Okay. Another thing, when you're correcting their writing, I would encourage content teachers to make corrections, especially things like verb tense. But don't just write verb tense. Show them what's wrong with the error. Did you use the present tense when you should have used the past or the participle? Or did you need a helping verb with an ing verb? So verb tenses, you definitely need to be thinking about helping them no matter what your field is, okay? Okay. One of the problems that I find with my pupils is when I'm helping them study for another class, they don't have a textbook. And so they don't have anything that they can refer back to. So I would encourage you, if you're not doing it already, to provide written copies of the things that you're doing in class. Give them the text that you read, post it on Google Classroom, put the PowerPoint up if they ask for it. If you've given them an article, provide that for them. One problem I had was my pupils were studying physics and I didn't know what the units of measurement were for the formula that they were using. And the teacher hadn't given them her PowerPoints or anything. And so we really struggled to go back and find what we were looking for. and revision is so important in Key Stage 3 that it's really important that our pupils be given written reinforcement. Okay. So that's pretty much it. I went through it pretty quickly. I've just given you a few resources. If vocabulary instruction is important to your school, this woman, Janet Allen, is phenomenal. She's got just tons and tons of activities on building content knowledge. So this one is academic vocabulary. She has one called Words, 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 which was her first one, and it's really incredible. And there's a link to one of her essays here. And another thing that I would encourage you to look at is this book, What School Leaders Need to Know About English Language Learners. This is really good. It's just kind of down and dirty basics of English language learning. And then, like I said, my pupils have this, I call it their EAL Bible, and Leah wasn't supposed to leave it in my class. She's supposed to take it with her. But in here are the things that we've learned in my class that they have to then take with them to their other classes. So for example, we study cause and signal words. And so I want her to take this with her so she can use them. And then irregular verbs. Now Leah hasn't colored hers, we color coded. That's another thing that's really important. I have it here. Is looking for patterns, because irregular verbs are just so overwhelming. So if we can start to look for the patterns, then they can, sorry, let me stop sharing so maybe y'all can see me bigger. They can start to understand and learn them easier, okay? Another really important thing is visuals. So we were discussing words that describe the body. And so I got characters from Harry Potter, and I had the pupils put them in some kind of order, and they always put them in order from prettiest to ugliest. They always do. This one is about body shape. And so they put them in order from skinniest to heaviest. And then once they've got them in that order, then I have them match up the words to the pictures. And this is called semantic, what's it called? Semantic gradients. I call it vocabulary ladder. That's what I call it. And then they have to come up with a title. And then you can do comparative and superlative adjectives as well. So that's about it. Any questions I can help you with now? If not, they will send me a list of all your questions, but I'm happy to answer the second book. The second book is Jan Edwards Dormer. And it comes from the TESOL Press, TESOL. Okay.
Okay, so thank you so much for sharing all those wonderful strategies and techniques and those resources with us. And again, at the end, those links will be very helpful. And I know that if anyone contacts ISAT for a copy of the slides, then we can provide those for you as well. So. And
I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm msmith@brightoncollege.ac.th. I'll put it in the chat in case anybody needs it. And I hope everybody found it beneficial, and I was happy to do it. So
Melissa, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Melissa, again.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.